Okay, good morning everyone and welcome to our weekly webinar. My name's Hilary Stupa and I'm a developer here with Qdabra software. For those of you who've attended webinars with me before, this one's going to be a little bit of a surprise in that it's going to be short and I'm not going to be dragging over time, and that's because this is a pretty quick thing to review. I just want to let everyone know that we are finally releasing qRules 8.1. So you know it's not in the web store yet. We should have it there on the 12th, on Monday. We still had a little wrap-up testing to take care of. So we just want to make sure everything's tested and we've got the builds tested and so forth before we drop it in the store. But it is close. It's going to be there very shortly. If you are a regular attendee, and I do see a lot of familiar names, you'll know that we've been working on Forms Viewer pretty heavily the past couple years. So there aren't any really huge changes coming in qRules 8.1, but we do have a few things that we have modified that I want to tell you about. We have, in a couple places, better error messages. You know, there's always this balance with error messages, right? We want to return enough that it's friendly and helpful to you as the form designer. We want to return an error message that is potentially useful enough and friendly enough that you can surface that to your form user. So we try in a lot of commands to make sure the error message is something that you can go ahead and just directly surface back up to the form user to help them correct mistakes they might have made in their form that would be causing a problem with a command. At the same point in time, we have to have enough information that when you tell us there's an error, we can figure out what's going wrong. So it can't be this complete, you know, cushioned experience, right? Because we have to have enough information to figure out what the problem is. However, there were a couple of places where we were able to clean up error messages, and a couple of things in specific that we addressed. If you specify a parameter more than once, we're letting you know that directly instead of just returning the command usage to you. So, for example, if it was a date diff command and you specify date1 2 times in your formula, which if you're copying and pasting stuff around, this is a pretty simple, you know, kind of mistake to make. We make these ourselves. And so we're letting you know, look, you repeated this parameter twice, and here's what the parameter is, just to help you find it. And if you leave a parameter blank, we're letting you know what parameter that was. I think in most cases previously we just returned the usage error for this as well. And when I say when you leave a parameter blank, I mean you've included the parameter, / parameter name, equal sign, but you have not included a value to the right-hand portion of the equal sign. Most of your qRules commands, if you're able to pass in something like blank for a parameter, we have you type in the word blank, because the regular expressions we're using to parse out the command line, they're just looking for what's on the right of the equal sign. It's, you know, nothing magic, nothing super sophisticated there. It's just regex. And so at this point, we've started returning a universal error if you leave something blank. And so just to help you during design time, we did some various bug fixes. This is all going to be in the release notes in the updated documentation. There was a little bug in the holidays logic if you were excluding holidays with date diff and date add. Submit to SharePoint list, there was a little bug that might return an incorrect ID number to an item. We had a bug that might cause attachments with special characters in the name to fail to save. So we've addressed those little things. If those affect you, you'll want to update. Delimited list command, we added an option to use a blank space for a separator. So delimited list is basically double eval for those of us who are too lazy to write double eval formulas, and I am definitely on that list. And sometimes it's nice to be able to separate your values with a blank. Execute SQL and save to SharePoint command, we added a timeout parameter to that. So if you're saving big files for your save to SharePoint, or if your execute SQL command takes a while for whatever reason, use the timeout parameter to just extend that. submit to DBXL and swapped on with document. We now support the with user key version of these. And the encode command, we added a new type of SharePoint file name. You guys know that there's some characters that SharePoint just doesn't want you to use in your file names. And when you go and upload a file to SharePoint that has those characters in there, usually SharePoint will drop in an underscore instead. And encode basically just is going to, if you include the SharePoint file name type, it's going to encode the file name the same way SharePoint would. In other words, replacing those special characters with underscores. The injector. We made some improvements to the injector. Most of you probably have saved backups of your form in case you want an inject. Some of you have sent them to me, and I'm fine with that to remove qRules for you, because sometimes we inject a form with qRules because we think we need it for something, or maybe we've started with a prior form and we end up pulling out the functionality we were using qRules for, or we find out that we're not going to be able to sandbox our form for whatever reason and we have to find some workarounds that don't involve qRules. Sometimes you just need to be able to remove it. So we did add an uninject button that will take out the code DLL and will remove the data connections. That is the one thing I'm going to demo for you today, because there's a couple little gotchas in there that I want you to be aware of. And also, you don't have to, when you install, you don't have to right-click, set up, and run as admin. I mean, you still have to have permissions to install software on your machine, but we've got a change there that we'll talk about in a little more detail. I made some changes to the start menu. We used to have everything kind of in nested folders, and those of you who are on Windows 10 may have noticed that everything shows up flat in your start menu anyway, and that is because the Windows 10 start menu doesn't support nested folders. So I went ahead and modified the installer. It used to be everything went under Qdabra, and then there was the folder for the actual stuff, and then there was a forms folder, and a this folder, and a that folder. And so now it's just I really flattened it out, and I made sure that the parent folder tells you, qRules and qRules trial, because otherwise, if you were like me and you might have both versions installed, you would end up with a folder that said Qdabra and had all of these files twice, and then you're just left guessing which one you're opening. So, at any rate, hopefully that will clarify any start menu confusion in Windows 10, which I'm sure at least some of you are using. If you're not using Windows 10, hopefully this will still be clear enough in your start menu on 7 and 8, heaven forbid. No, that's fine. If you're using 8, that's cool. I'm one of those skip a release people. Like, no, I went XP to 7 and then I went 7 to 10. So at any rate, the injector changes. Okay, so you guys have probably, I'm sure many of you have seen this. You install qRules, you go to run the injector, and you get an error getting solution version, or you try to inject and you get failed to extract template files, access to path blah 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 is denied, and an error occurred during the injection. This little guy right here, cablib64dll.delayload, or cablib32.dll.delayload, we were using a library. Okay, so we have to unpack your template files. You guys know that an XSN is a collection of files, and you can export as source files, or you can rename it as cab and look at the source files. In order to add the data connections and add the code DLL and all of that with the injector, we had to unpack the template and pack it back up. So that's pretty standard operating procedure if you want to do something programmatically with an XSN. The library we used to use, called cablib, you had to use a different DLL if you were using a 32 versus 64-bit system. We changed to using the Microsoft compression libraries with this version of the injector. So we no longer are trying to unpack a file in your programs files. And that's what was happening with the injector was there was a file that would get unpacked to your programs files. You had to have permissions to write to that. Therefore, if you didn't install as admin, or if you installed as admin and your machine wasn't listening to you that day, and you ran the injector from the start menu shortcut, you would end up in one of these error scenarios. And you'd have to go find it in your program files and right-click the injector and run as admin one time, and all of that nonsense. And that nonsense has now gone away, I'm happy to say, with this new library that we're using. So just, install. Yes, you have to have permissions on your machine to be able to install software, but since we're not unpacking to the programs file anymore, no more right-click setup and run as admin. Okay. I'm going to drop down to this bottom bullet first, and then we'll go back up to this top one. You can now, and I know for most of us it's not that big of a deal, but you can now inject forms with special characters in their file names. So it used to be, again, with that old library we were using for uncompressing the folders, special characters like a trademark symbol or a registered symbol or any of the other things you can go find in your character map on your machine. You couldn't unpack that. We couldn't unpack that. And so you would get an error injecting, and the workaround was not that big of a deal. Rename your template file something that didn't have special characters in it, and then, try again. But still, who wants to have to bother with that? And so you can now inject with special characters. We have this new uninject button. So the uninject button is not going to remove your rules. That means if you've got rules in your form that are setting the command field, we're not removing those. It's not going to change your views. That means if you have any of the Qdabra rules data source fields on your form canvas in any of your views, those don't get removed. So this means that before you uninject, you need to take care of these things in your form. Now, just leaving the rules is not going to cause you a problem, but the views, if you've got controls in your view that are bound to the Qdabra rules data source, and we programmatically pull that data source out, you're going to have problems. And that's the thing I want to show you, just as kind of a heads up. Let's make sure we're all on the same page here. The good news is, I want to go back once. The good news is, if you make a mistake, like you uninject your form and then you right-click your form, you select design, and I can't remember whether it's catastrophic error or operation failed. We'll look at the error and see. I think it's operation failed. You just re-inject, and then you get your form open, you go find your stuff, you clean it up, you close it, and you uninject again. And so, here are some screenshots, and we will look at this directly in a demo. But look, I give you a warning when you click the I'm doing all I can here. I give you a warning when you click the uninject button. I've got a tooltip on the uninject button that's going to warn you as well. And so just make sure you clean up your form first. And I say save a backup, but like I said, you can re-inject and fix problems. And you can see here's the error. If you leave controls in the view that are bound to the missing data source, InfoPath has encountered an error, the operation failed. So you will not get, InfoPath will give you nothing helpful. You will get no help from InfoPath on this issue. And then you can see your rule. You can see, you guys have seen this before, when you remove a data source or you remove a field and you have a rule that is based on that field. For example, this was a rule on a button. You get the whole thing instead of the nice underlined resolved node path. You've got the get dump, blah, blah, blah. Before we go and look at a demo, we've got some documentation updates. Just so you know, I did add Forms Viewer to this matrix in the command overview. And so we've marked the stuff that's Forms Viewer compatible. Just so you guys know, Forms Viewer is really constantly changing right now. I mean, we're definitely actively working on that product in terms of, as people say, oh, Forms Viewer doesn't have this qRules command yet, and I need it for my form to use it in Forms Viewer. We get it added. So this matrix, by the time I get it uploaded and by the time we're released on the 12th, is probably going to be slightly out of date. but it's not that we're going to have fewer things that are Forms Viewer compatible. It's that there are more. And so you can check the release history for Forms Viewer. And there is one command that's Forms Viewer only called load resource. And you know, I just went ahead and put it in the command overview so that we'd have it documented. Okay, I'm going to pause my slideshow if I can figure out how PowerPoint works. Okay, I believe my slideshow is paused, and we are going to take a quick look at what happens when we uninject a form that has some qRules stuff already in it. So here's my sample form. I'm going to just knock that down a little bit. On my button, I have a rule. It's setting the command field here. Okay, and then you can see I've got in my view here, I've got these items that are bound to the Qdabra rules data source. Okay, so I don't really want to save my changes. So I'm going to go find my injector, and I'm going to run it. And the reason I want to show you guys this is because the first time I did this to myself, I was like, well, what did I do wrong here? So here's our tooltip. Hey, do please clean up your form. So I'm going to hit uninject, and here's our warning. And here's our little list showing what's happened. We've removed things. I'm going to say OK. Now I'm going to hit this in design mode, and I get my error. Okay, and so I can just close this up. I can inject it, and now that it's re-injected with qRules, I can go into design mode. It'll open up, and now I can just, I'm going to leave my button. I'm going to just remove that and save, close, uninject. So again, it's just not catastrophic. If something happens and you uninject your form and you can't get it open again, then just re-inject it, reopen it, and figure out what's going on. And you can see here my rule. You can see my rule is wackadoodle, right? That I'm not resolving to the command field, and that's cool. You can, if you're in doubt, you can leave your rules temporarily. You know, as long as they're not on a Qdabra rules data source, they would still be there. And in fact, I think that I also checked and saw that if the data source was added back, the orphan rules were reattached. So let me just make sure that I'm not talking crazy talk here. Yeah. So when I removed this data source, you couldn't find this rule because obviously the data source wasn't here. But when I re-added the data source, my rule is still there. So uninject, re-inject, that's probably fine with still some commands in the form, with the realization, right, that your rule isn't going to do anything because the field can't be found, just like any time in InfoPath that you remove a data source. But having stuff in the view is that can be a problem. Okay, and so that's really all I wanted to show you there. Otherwise, you know, no huge changes. Documentation is updated. I'm going to drop the new documentation on InfoPath Dev 2. I found out recently that our documentation there is pretty out of date. That happens. So it'll be with the build and it'll be updated there. If you haven't looked into Forms Viewer, make sure you do look into Forms Viewer. It's getting really cool, and it's a good opportunity to get rid of your dependence on Microsoft to continue supporting InfoPath for your browser forms. So definitely start looking into Forms Viewer for your browser form support. Hopefully, folks have some qRules related questions. If you do, feel free to type them in. And we'll just give you a minute for questions, and then we'll call this wrapped up and send everybody on their way. Okay. Well, maybe there are no questions. It's not like we covered anything that was complicated. Again, release should be in the store on the 12th. Everybody here, I think, probably knows my email address. If you don't, you can find me on the InfoPath Dev forum and send me an email through the forum. So if you've got questions, let me know. There aren't really going to be any materials from this, but if you do fill out the survey, that would be appreciated. I added a little question because I'm dying to know if anybody's using Power Apps yet. I tried it back when it first started coming into public release, and I know there's been features added, and I just haven't had a chance to get back to it yet. So if you have a second to answer the survey, at least answer my Power Apps question, because I'm curious to know who's trying it. I doubt I'll talk to everybody again this year, so happy holidays to everyone, happy new year, and drop me an email if you've got any specific questions. Oh, thank you. Have a great day, everybody. Bye-bye.